Welcome back, everyone. It's difficult to find a religious ideology more hateful and prejudiced than Islam. Moreover, whether it's Islamic imperialism, or the Islamic slave trade, or racism in the Arab world, or religious bigotry, or a host of other crimes against humanity, the Muslim world does not ever seem to say mea culpa. They don't reckon with their past or present sins. And as Islamic culture continues to clash with the West, such behavior is being facilitated by Western leaders, while the theological and historical underpinnings are whitewashed by far too many academics. So in this video, we're going to dive into arguably the Quran's most hateful verse, and out of the list of various people groups who are the targets of Islamic hatred, the Jews have to be at the very top. I say arguably the Quran's most hateful verse because there is much competition. For example, in chapter 2, the God of Islam pronounces a curse of sorts when he says, "Humiliation and wretchedness were stamped upon the Jews." And of course, such harsh language has enduring implications, especially as it's magnified through the lenses of Muslim commentators over the centuries. Or there are the verses where the Quran retells old legends. I know the Quran does that a lot, so let me narrow that down a bit for you. Recall those stories where Jews were turned into animals, and not the flattering kind either, apes and pigs. Out of all of the animals Allah could have chosen, it just had to be apes and pigs. I always love mentioning at this point how Muslim scholars debated whether the apes and pigs could reproduce. If they could, then some of the apes and pigs we see today may be descended from cursed Jews. Muhammad thought that the Jews were turned into various other types of animals too, like lizards and snakes. Beyond simply being stupid, this stuff is extremely hateful. So there's lots of competition, as I said, but my suggestion for the Quran's most hateful verse is found in chapter 5, verse 82. Certainly you will find that the most violent of people in enmity to the believers, that is, the Muslims, are the Jews and the idolaters. Islamic Jew hatred is a vast topic, but to be somewhat more comprehensive, we may suggest a few fundamental motivations for this vicious bigotry before looking more specifically at Surah 582. Maimonides was, of course, a renowned Jewish scholar who died at the beginning of the 13th century. One reason he cites for Muslims' persecution and discrimination against the Jews is a classic. I'll just summarize it for you. The Jews couldn't find Muhammad in the Bible. Also, it's the Jews' fault Muhammad isn't in the Bible. Whoever wrote the Quran made numerous egregious blunders, and one of them was the absolutely indefensible claim that Muhammad was foretold in the Bible. And since he's not, the Jews must have traveled swiftly over a vast area, obtained all biblical manuscripts everywhere, and edited out all of the references to Muhammad. Centuries later, even the best scholars have apparently been tricked by the Jews, since they can find no evidence whatsoever that such tampering ever happened. In reality, this would be a small feat for the people who would one day control the world's banking systems, media, weather, and even the space lasers. Regardless, Jews like those in Maimonides' day were persecuted for not affirming Muhammad is in the Bible, which he's not, as well as for corrupting the biblical text, which was the Muslims' explanation for why Muhammad isn't in the Bible. We're talking about the 12th/13th centuries in this example, but this whole problem was an open wound on the face of Islamic apologetics a long time before, and it continues to be until this day. A second reason goes back to Muhammad's early years in Mecca and Medina, according to the Islamic sources, for whatever that's worth. Most Jews rejected Muhammad, and rejecting Muhammad threatened the whole Islamic imperialistic enterprise. So Muhammad had to kill a bunch of Jewish men and take their women and children captive, or in some cases just kill them too. I mean, there was just no other way. Having tried nothing, Muhammad and his men were out of options. Only jihad, slavery, ambush, siege, beheadings, and torture would work now. So yes, rejecting Muhammad, your friendly neighborhood prophet, sours relationships, as it did with the Jews. As Dr. Andrew Boston points out in his massive volume on Islamic anti-Semitism, this cause of Muslim hatred toward the Jews was cited by the 9th century polymath known as Al-Jahiz. But what Al-Jahiz said next takes us to the third reason Muslims hate Jews, and that takes us back to Surah 582. We enter the discussion where Al-Jahiz, back in the 9th century, is explaining why Muslims hate Jews more than Christians. After citing reasons related to Muhammad's early rejection by the Jews, he continues, "Another circumstance which is the most potent cause is the wrong interpretation given by the masses to the Quranic verses," and then he goes on to cite Surah 582 and following, where verse 82, of course, deals, as we've seen, specifically with the Jews. While Al-Jahiz doesn't agree with this reading of the verse, in his day, Surah 582 was widely interpreted to define relationships between Muslims and Jews. The Quran says Jews are the worst, and What do you know? The Quran's right. The problem magnifies when we look at the Muslim exegetical traditions. Major Islamic scholars have used their commentary on Surah 582 to make predictable remarks about the Jews. Here's Ibn Kathir as an example. In his commentary on Surah 582, he actually calls down the curses of Allah on the Jews until the day of resurrection. But why stop at the day of resurrection? Oh yeah, by the time we get to the end times, according to Muhammad, Muslims have killed all the Jews with the help of talking rocks and trees. Let's continue into the modern period with this one brief citation. The illustrious Sayyid Qutb, in his giant commentary, The Shade of the Quran, comments on Surah 582. He says, when we look at the history of Islam, ever since its very early days until the present moment, we have no doubt that the hostility of the Jews to the believers has always been more fierce, determined, and so forth than the hostility of everyone else. Okay, and then he continues. Let's just jump to the next paragraph. When the Prophet settled in Medina, he concluded a treaty of peaceful coexistence with the Jews and called them to believe in Islam, which confirmed a Torah that had been revealed to them before. They, however, did not fulfill their obligations under this treaty. They broke the treaty, those darn Jews. Let's go to the next paragraph and see what he says. They harbored hostility toward Islam and the Muslims from the very first day when God united the two Arab tribes. Wow, how much more does he say here? They incited all the forces of pagan Arabia against Islam, and they worked hard to forge an alliance with all previously hostile tribes to... Okay, he just keeps going. Next paragraph. When Islam was able to overcome them with the force of truth, they tried... Oh, I like this part. They tried to scheme against it by incorporating fabrications into their books. The only book which remained pure was and is the Quran. How convenient. God's book. Goodness. What a moron. Okay, let's just keep going. Let's see what else he says about the Jews. In recent history, they have been the ones to lead the war against Islam throughout the world and have won, by the way, like every time. Funny how that works. It is they who utilize Christian and idolatrous forces in an all-out effort against Islam. I'm just thinking back to World War II when Muhammad Amin al-Husseini allied with Hitler to try to kill all the Jews in Jerusalem. Anyway, it's they who create... Okay, whatever. Keep going. An alliance of forces hostile to Islam was forged in order to... Oh my goodness, how far does he go? Okay. 30 years later, a group of Jews started a mass uprising, bringing together the remnants of hostile groups. Okay, he just keeps going. In more recent history, it was a Jew who stirred nationalistic feelings. He gave prominence to them in the last Islamic Caliphate. Oh goodness, there's another paragraph. Let's see. The war that the Jews have launched against Islam has been much longer lasting and wider in spectrum. He just goes on and on and on. There's no wonder his stupid commentary is so ridiculously long. Now let's check in with one of the top dogs of Sunni Islam. That would be the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University. Let's see what he says. What do you think? Just a wild guess. You think he likes Jews? Nah. He says a verse in the Quran explains the Muslims' relations with the Jews and polytheists. The second part of the verse describes the Muslims' relations with the Christians, and the third part explains why the Christians are closest and most friendly to the Muslims. And of course, he's talking about Surah 582. This is an historical perspective, he says, which has not changed to this day. See how we suffer today from global Zionism and Judaism, whereas our peaceful coexistence with the Christians... Yeah, forget about that whole part where Muslim armies, dare I say it, crusaded their way through Christian lands, slaughtering people for centuries. Our peaceful coexistence with the Christians has withstood the test of history. Since the inception of Islam 1400 years ago, we have been suffering from Jewish and Zionist interference in Muslim affairs. This is a cause of great distress for the Muslims. It's the Muslims who are distressed. You see, they're always the victims. It's amazing. The Quran said it, and history has proven it. One starts to wonder if this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, maybe some projection. I don't know. Nah, it couldn't be. You shall find the strongest among men in enmity to the believers to be the Jews and the polytheists. The projection of Muslim authorities commenting on this verse knows no bounds, and if there are any Muslims watching who espouse these views, then grab a mirror, look into it, and you'll see the actual problem. Before we wrap up, there's one more relevant observation. It's fashionable, trendy, and maybe even cool to say, as many people do, that anti-Semitism is really the fault of the West. I mean, isn't everything? Google certainly wants me to think so. I asked, is Islam anti-Semitic? And Google's AI told me that experts, relax, the experts are talking to us now, experts widely agree that modern anti-Semitism, particularly in the Arab and Muslim world, is different from historical anti-Judaism and is heavily influenced by modern European anti-Semitic ideas. It's not the fault of the Muslim world. You see, they have no agency. They were simply puppets dancing on the strings of European anti Semitic puppet masters. Garbage. Here's a pro tip. We don't need the experts to tell us anything. Muslim authorities just say the thing themselves out loud. If the experts say something different, then maybe they have a bias or an agenda. The Islamic sources, many centuries old, all reek of hatred and abhorrent treatment of Jews. But the crown jewel of Islamic bigotry may be chapter 5 of the Quran, verse 82. It was the main source of theological hatred against the Jews in Al-Jah's day. Centuries later, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University believes there are 1,400 years of history that prove it to be true. It's as if the verse became normative in the Muslim conscience. In Islam, we find a prophet who treated Jews terribly. We find literary sources full of hatred for them, and imams across the world reveling and preaching that stupid hadith about Muslims killing all the Jews in the end times. At the same time, Surah 582 is right. The Jews are so mean to us. They're meaner than everyone else. It's pathetic. So what do you think? Is Surah 582 the most hateful verse in the Quran, or is there another? Let me know your thoughts and why in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.